Welcome into Rob Wright's Gen X Pop Culture. And on today's show, if the spooky music didn't cue you in, we're talking about Ghostbusters from 1984. One of my favorite movies. I consider this almost a perfect movie, and it's one of my favorite comedies from back in the day. I remember going to see it as a kid in the movie theater and being on the edge of my seat for the whole thing. Some parts did scare me a little bit, but it was a lot of fun. A fun scare, a fun watch, and hilarious comedians doing what they do best in an amazing comedy sci-fi movie. Today, I'll talk about the production of Ghostbusters. I'll also talk about some of the casting, because there were some stars that had opportunities to be in this movie who turned it down. Then I'll talk a little bit about the music and the special effects, particularly the ghosts in this movie. And finally, I'll wrap it up with some of my favorite scenes. So I hope you loved Ghostbusters. I hope you find this enjoyable. If you do, please hit the like and subscribe to my channel. Also, I want to plug this. This year is the 40th anniversary of Ghostbusters, and it has a sequel that's out called Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I know a lot of YouTubers have had their thoughts about it that have been somewhat negative. If you look at my channel, I give it positive reviews. It's actually a fun movie. It doesn't live up to this original, but it's still a lot of fun. It has the spirit of the original, and I really want to encourage you to go see it because I think it's getting a lot of hate from different sides and different groups when it's just really a fun summer movie, and it's quite enjoyable. So if you have the time, take a couple hours, go see Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. I think you'll find it fun if you like the original Ghostbusters movies. Let's get in to the production of this movie. Ghostbusters is the brainchild of Dan Aykroyd. He's the one that thought of the whole movie, and he's the one that wrote the original script. Dan Aykroyd was inspired by his beliefs in the paranormal, which he inherited from several family members. His father wrote a book, A History of Ghosts. His mother claimed to have seen ghosts. His grandfather experimented with radios to try and contact mediums and ghosts and people from the dead. And his great-grandfather was a renowned spiritualist. In 1981, Aykroyd read an article on quantum physics, and he also read about parapsychology in the Journal of the American Society for Psychoclinical Research. Try saying that 3 times. And it gave him the idea for trapping ghosts. Aykroyd was also inspired by early movies from the 40s and 50s, starring Abbott Costello and Bob Hope. Hold That Ghost with Abbott Costello, The Ghost Breakers with Bob Hope, and also another movie, The Bowery Boys, also known as Ghost Chasers, in 1951. So Dan Aykroyd put all this together and kind of came up with a script. And originally he had Jim Belushi and Eddie Murphy to star with him in the movie. So let's take a minute to really reflect on that. What would Ghostbusters have been like with John Belushi and Eddie Murphy? It's a funny thought. Very interesting. Tragically, while he was still writing the script, and actually the story from Dan Aykroyd, he was actually writing a line for John Belushi in his script when he got the call from his agent that John had passed away. His immediate reaction was to go and tell John's widow before the word got out in the papers. Back then, word didn't travel as fast as it does today. Usually you had a morning and an evening edition of the paper, and that's how, information traveled. So he wanted to beat the press to her home and tell her so that she would get it from a friend and not from a newspaper. He was able to beat the paper there, and he was able to tell her. And I can't imagine what that was like. I can't imagine what it was like for him losing one of his best friends. It must have been gut-wrenching, but I'm glad he did it. It just shows what kind of friend he was and how much he cared about John and his widow. And kudos for Aykroyd for doing that. And it's just kind of a sad tale, but it's part of the story of Ghostbusters. Eddie Murphy couldn't do Ghostbusters, and here's the reason why. Everybody says that he turned it down. Eddie Murphy, in several interviews, has told people that he really didn't turn it down. He said he only really turned down one big role in his life, and that was actually Who Framed Roger Rabbit that he turned down. He was too busy with Beverly Hills Cop to be able to shoot Ghostbusters. So that's why Eddie Murphy's not in the film. But I think we got a great cast instead, don't you? Anyway, Dan Aykroyd needed another person to kind of really help out with Ghostbusters. And one of the people that he thought of was his fellow castmate in Saturday Night Live, Bill Murray. So he talked to Bill about the script. Bill kind of agreed to do it, and he was going to film Razor's Edge and another film as well. And so Aykroyd went to find a director, and he turned to Ivan Reitman. And Reitman had done several hits. Stripes and Animal House were among the two big ones that he did. And so he's familiar with kind of the approach that Aykroyd was going to want to take. However, Reitman looked at Aykroyd's script and basically said, hey, we can't do this right now. That would cost way too much. See, Aykroyd's script called for all kinds of crazy stuff. Some of the things that I have read about it include different Ghostbuster groups, different dimensions, different dimensional beings, a futuristic setting, and all kinds of whacked out stuff. Reitman said, hey, we need to pare this down. Otherwise, this movie is going to cost over $200 million. Now, $200 million is a large budget film for today. Back in 1984, that was extremely large. So Reitman and Aykroyd turned to another one of their great writing friends and actors. That's right. They turned to Harold Ramis, who, it's sad that we lost him so early, but Harold Ramis is an enormous part of Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters lore, along with what he did for the script. So Ramis and Aykroyd started working on the script, and what they did was they went to Martha's Vineyard and they kind of sequestered themselves. And what they would do is each would write separately and bring their drafts to each other, and they would change scenes and work things out until finally they got a good working script. And what they did after that was they talked to Bill Murray, and Bill Murray read their finished script. And Bill Murray was like, yeah, I love this. And he didn't have anything to add to it. And part of that was because Harold Ramis was so good at tweaking and turning scripts. And he also had worked with Bill Murray on Stripes and had written for Murray. So he knew how to write his character, which is a plus because Bill Murray's character stands out in this movie by far. Anyway, when they decided how they were going to do it, some interesting things that they looked at. They looked at the archetypes of each of the characters, the three main Ghostbusters. So what they did was they said that Ramis's character would be the brains of the outfit. Egon is the brain, Aykroyd's the heart, and Murray's the mouth. And it kind of mirrors the Wizard of Oz. Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, Egon Spengler are the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man. Pretty cool way to do that. Their original concept for Ghostbusters had a boss, and the boss was supposed to send them out on missions to catch ghosts. But Ramis wanted to simplify that and add more to the characters, giving them a different feel by owning their own business rather than have a boss that they would work for. And what it did was it helped the characters become a little bit more individualistic. So you had Bankman as the cool modern salesman. So he's selling everybody on it. It helped to see Ray as the honest, enthusiastic technician and Egon as the factual, stoic intellectual. So they were able to get all this and get it back to Reitman. And Reitman looked at it and he loved what he was doing, but there were some issues that he had with the script as well, particularly with some of the ghosts and some of the effects. So one of the things that was supposed to happen was the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man was supposed to come out of the East River 20 minutes in the movie. And Reitman said, no, that probably doesn't go here. It needs to go towards the end of the story. The other thing that Reitman struggled with the rights and how to shoot this film was they took a realistic approach and they wanted to, how do I make this a little bit more realistic, and how do I get it to where there's an ending battle and bring on this big marshmallow man at the end? And so they had to kind of figure that out. And so one of the things they did to make it more realistic is to kind of give a backstory of how they got into ghost busting and how they developed this business. And then the second act would be how they chased ghosts, and the third act would finish with Dana's story and the whole Zool Gozer concept, which really worked for the film in the writing and the filming of it. So that's how we got this great movie. Let's talk a little bit about the cast. Bill Murray was essential for Ghostbusters. As previously mentioned about him, taking on the role that John Belushi couldn't take on. So in order to secure Murray's commitment to the movie, they decided to fund his passion project, The Razor's Edge, hoping that even if The Razor's Edge failed, it would lose little money and the gesture would be enough to get Murray to be in Ghostbusters. However, there's several other actors that they considered in case Murray couldn't do it. Among them were Michael Keaton, Chevy Chase, Tom Hanks, Robin Williams, Steve Guttenberg, and Richard Pryor. Let's just take a moment to analyze that. Michael Keaton, I think he might have been able to pull off Peter Venkman, but I'm not sure at that time that he was quite as well known or quite, into his comedy routines. I think Michael Keaton started to hit his stride with Beetlejuice and a little bit later on with Tim Burton and some of those films with Batman and a few others. But Michael Keaton is certainly a great actor, and I think he's highly underrated as an actor, and that's another story for another day. Chevy Chase would have been funny, but I'm not sure that Peter Venkman fits his style of comedy. I don't think he would have been a good fit. Tom Hanks would have been interesting. Tom Hanks during this time was doing Bosom Buddies, and he was doing a couple of other comedy movies. He was known more as a comedic actor before he really got into more dramatic roles and really expanded his acting range. I think he could have pulled it off, but I don't think he would have been as good as Murray. Robin Williams would have been crazy in it. I don't see him in that role at all, but he would have added all kinds of hilarious craziness to this movie. I don't think he would have fit in as Peter Venkman or any Ghostbuster. I think he might have fit in the role of Louis Tully, but that's another discussion for another day. Steve Guttenberg might have been able to pull it off. He had just started the Police Academy movies and was real well known for those, but I'm not sure if he really brought what Bill Murray brought to this role. Richard Pryor would have been amazing. Richard Pryor has his own unique style of comedy. It would have been interesting to have him in the role of Peter Venkman. But alas, Bill Murray did decide to do it, and we got Bill Murray, and thank goodness, because he did a great job as the character Peter Venkman, and I couldn't really see anybody else doing it after watching his performance in Ghostbusters. Now, Egon Spengler had a couple of other suitors for that role. Harold Ramis hadn't decided yet whether or not he wanted to commit to being the character or just being a writer for this movie. So they considered Christopher Walken, John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, Jeff Goldblum, and again, Michael Keaton. So once again, Michael Keaton was considered for 2 roles in this movie. Now, Christopher Walken as Egon Spengler, I don't know if that would fit his unique style. It would have been funny, it would have been interesting, but to me, Christopher Walken would bring about more of a mad scientist type role to it, and I'm not sure that the character of Egon would have worked well for Christopher Walken. John Lithgow would have been unique. John Lithgow is a really good actor. I think he's highly underrated too, but a lot of times he's really good, especially playing villains. So I'm not sure how well he would have fit as Egon. Christopher Lloyd, Doc Brown himself, would have been a riot as Egon. That would have been hilarious. That would have been funny. However, I think Harold Ramis brought more to the role, and I love Christopher Lloyd as Doc Brown rather than Dr. Egon Spengler. Jeff Goldblum would have been interesting. However, he's played this type of role in various other movies, and I think Harold Ramis was a little bit better for the part than Jeff Goldblum. And as we get to the role of Winston, there's been some debate about Winston, whether it was necessarily Eddie Murphy's part, or he was kind of a mixture of Harold Ramis's character and Winston as the role that originally Dan Aykroyd had for Eddie Murphy. It's difficult to say. I've heard different things about it. But Ernie Hudson, who is fantastic in this and does a great job as Winston, he's also really good in the sequels that have come out this year in Frozen Empire and in Ghostbusters Afterlife. Winston's character really expands, and you really get a good feel for that character. In this, he comes on towards the middle of the movie, and there was really a backstory for Winston that didn't get shown. He was supposed to be an ex-Air Force demolitions expert, and that would run a unique, interesting aspect to his character and to the Ghostbusters team. However, they had to cut some of that script in order to shave it down to a more reasonable time frame. So that's what happened. Gregory Hines and Reginald VelJohnson were also considered for the part. Reginald VelJohnson also has a cameo in part of this movie as one of the cops, which was fitting because he ended up playing a cop in Die Hard. For the role of Dana Barrett, Sigourney Weaver knocks it out, and I think she does a great job. But guess who they had going for this role? Daryl Hannah, Denise Crosby of Star Trek: The Next Generation fame, Julia Roberts, and Kelly LeBrock, all auditioned for the role. Sigourney Weaver attracted the filmmaker's attention from her movies Alien, The Year of Living Dangerously, and she also had a comedic background from her days at Yale School of Drama. And apparently in her audition, what she did was she did the dog scene and walked on all fours and acted like she was becoming a dog, and that kind of sold her on it. Weaver also changed Dana's occupation when she got the role from a model to a musician. And basically, she said that she can be somewhat strict, but also has a soul because she plays the cello, which I thought was really cool. It's great casting, great way to do that. I mean, I can't imagine Daryl Hannah in that role. Daryl Hannah just comes across as somebody that's very sweet and very kind. And I think Dana's a little bit more to the point. Denise Crosby would have been interesting. Julia Roberts would have been interesting as well. And Kelly LeBrock, wow. Real interesting choices for Dana. However, Sigourney Weaver owns that role. She does an amazing job, and I really like her in this movie. And in Ghostbusters 2, she does a fantastic job. Wait till you hear about the role for Louis Tully. You'll never guess who they originally wanted for that. John Candy. Let's take a minute to think about this. John Candy is Louis Tully. Could he pull it off? Absolutely. Wow. It just amazes me to even think about that. Anyway, he was offered the role, and he told Reitman that he did not understand the character. He thought about portraying Tully as a German with multiple German shepherds. But basically, they had enough dogs in the film, and they were trying to go for a New York feel since it was set in New York City. So John Candy kind of said, no, I can't really play this role, but hey, try my buddy Rick Moranis. Rick Moranis read the script and apparently within a couple of hours called Reitman back and said, yes, I want to do the part, and thank you, John Candy, for turning it down. So I think Moranis did an excellent job as Louis Tully. One of my favorite characters in the movie. He really shows his range as a comedic actor and is fantastic in that role. So let's get to Janine Melnitz. Sandra Bernhardt turned down the role of the Ghostbusters secretary, which went to Annie Potts, who was fantastic in the role. Love Annie Potts. She is a lot of fun. she's hilarious in several things that she's done, especially with her shows Designing Women and in Young Sheldon. She's just an amazing comedic actor and a lot of fun. So she nailed the role. She quickly changed out of her street clothes and borrowed a pair of glasses worn by the set dresser for her audition. And it was the same pair of glasses the character wore throughout the film. So Andy Potts just really did a bang-up job and really nailed this role. A villain for this movie, William Atherton. What better villain could you choose? William Atherton, who also went on to play in similar roles in Real Genius and in the Die Hard movies. He was chosen to play Walter Peck after he appeared in the Broadway play Broadway. Peck was described as akin to Margaret Dumonley's role as a comedic foil to like the Marx Brothers. Atherton said, "It can't be funny, and I don't find the Ghostbusters in the least bit charming. I have to be outraged." So he really took on that role and is great in it. I do love his scenes, and particularly the way the Ghostbusters react to him. Each one of the Ghostbusters has a little bit of a dig with him, and it's just hilarious. The role of Sumerian god Gozer, the Gozerian, was envisioned as a business suit architect. Now, you won't believe who they originally had for this role. If you think about a business suit, you're thinking, okay, maybe it's somebody that plays a strong-willed businessman. No, they wanted Pee Wee Herman. They intended it for Paul Rubens. Can you believe that? I can't believe that. Pee Wee Herman as Gozer. Just think about that for a moment. The first thing that comes to your mind is his laugh, right? And half a dozen other stupid dad jokes, right? Pee Wee Herman's great. He had a wonderful TV show, but I couldn't see Paul Rubens in this role. Anyway, he passed on the idea, and they got a Yugoslavian actress, and I can't pronounce her name, but she was cast, and she did a great job. Gozer the Gozerian is just really kind of scary, and her outfit has the look of Grace Jones and a little bit of David Bowie in it, and it's just kind of interesting. Because she wasn't from the United States, they had to really overdub her voice, and that made it easier to do. Also, another cool thing about the movie is Reitman's wife and children, Jason and Catherine, filmed a cameo appearance fleeing Dana's building. However, the scene had to be cut because Jason was too scared by the setup to perform the second take. So Jason Reitman did have a bit of a role in it, but it was cut. And Jason actually had a role in Ghostbusters 2, and he went on to direct Ghostbusters Afterlife, and he's one of the writers for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. So he really took on his dad's creation and really developed the sequels. Let's talk about the music and special effects. The score for Ghostbusters was done by the great composer Elmer Bernstein, who had scored several of Reitman's other films and projects. It was performed by the 72-person Hollywood Studio Symphony Orchestra at the Village in West Los Angeles and was orchestrated by David Spear and Bernstein's own son, Peter. Reitman wanted a grounded, realistic score, and he didn't want the music to tell the audience when something was funny. Bernstein also used a unique instrument, an Ondas Martinut, which is kind of a theremin, kind of the keyboard equivalent of a theremin. And he had to bring in a musician from overseas because there was nobody trained to be able to play it. So I thought that was interesting. The eerie sounds that you hear in this is that instrument. Bernstein described Ghostbusters as the most difficult score he had to write, finding it challenging to balance the varying comedic and serious tones in the film. He also created an antic theme for the Ghostbusters he described as cute, without being really way out. He also found the latter parts of the film easier to score, aiming to make it sound awesome and mystical. So I love the score and the different musical tones through this movie. Bernstein just does a bang-up job in it. However, it did have a soundtrack, and I had the tape as a kid. So early on, Reitman and Bernstein discussed the idea of adding popular music at specific points in the film. Specifically, they pointed to Magic by Mick Smiley, which is the scene where all the ghosts get loose. Interesting score and interesting song there. However, Bernstein hated it. Um, and then Bernstein's main theme for the Ghostbusters was later replaced by Ray Parker Jr.'s Ghostbusters. And Bernstein, uh, it was hard to argue with Ghostbusters, but he really hated Magic and thought it should have been something else that he did in that scene. Ghostbusters went on to be a top 10 hit, and it's so interesting how they did it. And I'll go into that a little bit. So, when they were trying to come up with an idea for a modern song, they originally, when they were doing the filming, they used Huey Lewis's I Want a New Drug, and it was a temporary placeholder. Ray Parker Jr. was brought in. They apparently auditioned several different bands and trying to figure out how to do a song for Ghostbusters to match it and to maybe match the riff of I Want a New Drug. Well, they interviewed like 50 to 60 different artists and did a bunch of different theme songs. And finally, Parker came up with the Ghostbusters song that we all see and love today. However, because of its similarity to I Want a New Drug, Huey Lewis and the News sued Ray Parker, and they settled out of court. I don't know the specifics of the settlement. They really can't talk about it because of the court order. As a matter of fact, Huey Lewis talked about it in 2001 and had to pay extra royalties because he talked about it instead of following the order. But it's interesting nonetheless. I like both songs. I don't know that they really sound as alike as my ears can hear, but they're both great. And what would Ghostbusters be without Who You Gonna Call? Ghostbusters. I don't think it would be as good without that song. So I'm glad it's in there. Anyway, let's talk a little bit more about the special effects. So one of my favorite creatures in this movie is Slimer. And you can see part of him in the upper left-hand corner here. And Steve Johnson sculpted Slimer. And he originally was called the Onion Head Ghost. And he was on set due to the puppet's unpleasant smell, because when they developed them, it had kind of an oniony smell. And that's why it was called the Onion Head Ghost. The creature was given the name Slimer in 1986 animated TV series, The Real Ghostbusters. The Slimer design took 6 months and cost approximately $300,000 to make. Wow, that's expensive. But for great special effects like that, it was worth it. Johnson, had trouble finishing it off, and he finally finished it, and he based the character's part on John Belushi. And the full-size foam rubber puppet was made and worn by Mark Wilson and filmed against a black background. Puppeteers manipulated the model's movements with cables. So Slimer represents John Belushi in Ghostbusters, and it's kind of a really cool homage to him, particularly if you think of the movie Animal House and John Belushi's character in that. You can pretty much pair him up with Slimer. It's pretty cool, especially if you think about the cafeteria scene from Animal House. If you know what I'm talking about, you'll really match that up really well with Slimer. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, which is probably my favorite of the ghosts. You can see him up there. Aykroyd talked to his friend, referred to as the Viking, with designing the Marshmallow Man. They were looking for a combination of the Michelin Man and the Pillsbury Doughboy in a sailor hat. The Marshmallow Man outfit was built and portrayed by an actor and special effects artist, Bill Bryan, who modeled his walk on Godzilla. There were 18 foam suits, each costing between $25,000 and $30,000. 17 of them, worn by stuntman Tommy Caesar, were burned as part of filming. Bryan used a separate air supply due to the foam's toxicity, and there were 3 different heads for the suit, built from foam, fiberglass, with different expressions and movements controlled by cable mechanisms. The costume was filmed against scale models to finish the effect. It's just so cool. I love the Marshmallow Man and all his different various looks and how he attacks things and and how they shoot him and what happens with him. It's just great. It's just a fantastic effect. And these back then, these were practical effects. They didn't have CGI back then. Computer graphics were starting to be developed, but it was in its infancy. So you really had to go with these practical effects. And kudos to the crew here. They did a fantastic job. I mean, these creatures look scary and real. Johnson also sculpted the zombie cab driver, which you see over here to the left. He was made into kind of a puppet. He's the only puppet shot on location in New York. They filmed some of it in New York and most of it in Los Angeles. Johnson based the reanimated corpse puppet he had made from an American werewolf in London from 1981. Johnson and Wilson collaborated on the library ghost, which you see in the middle here, creating a puppet operated by up to 20 cables running through the torso that controlled aspects such as moving the head, arms, and pulling rubber skin away from the torso to transform it from a humanoid into a monstrous ghoul, which you see in the monstrous ghoul right there. The original library ghost puppet was considered too scary for younger audiences and repurposed for use in Fright Night. The library catalog scene was accomplished live in 3 takes with the crew blowing air through copper pipes to force the cards into the air. These have been collected and reassembled for each take. Reitman used multi-camera setup to focus on the librarian and the cards flying around her and a wider overshot. The floating books were hung on strings. So kind of cool how they shot that and what they did. Finally, let's talk about the terror dogs, which are a big part of that and are the coolest creatures on this movie, especially how they interact with Dana and with Louis Tully. I'll talk about some of those scenes because some of them are my favorite. Randy Cook was responsible for creating the quarter-scale stop-motion puppets of Gozer's minions, Zool and Venez, the terror dogs. When in motion, the model was heavy and unwieldy. It took nearly 30 hours to film it moving across a 30-foot stage for the scene where it pursues Louis Tully across the street. 30 hours for that one little scene, which is great. It's fantastic, but wow. I mean, back then, you really had to spend some time and do these, and these practical effects were really hard to do. Dana was pinned in her chair by dynamic hands before the doorway beaming light, and that took a while to do. And Reitman said he was influenced by Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and a rubber door was used to allow for distortion, as if something was trying to come through it, while grips concealed in a trapdoor beneath the chair burst through it while wearing demonic dog leg gloves. Interesting. It was fascinating how they did that. So you had a rubber door and different perspective, and you had these guys that had the gloved hands of the dogs capturing her in the sofa chair. It was way before the advent of computer-generated imagery. Any non-puppet Gus had to be animated, and it took up to 3 weeks to create 1 second of footage. I mean, can you imagine how long it took to do all those effects? I mean, several days, several hours just to get a couple of seconds of footage. So a lot went into this movie. That's part of the reason why it's so great. All these wonderful practical effects. And in my opinion, it's what made movies great, because you had a lot of care, a lot of heart, a lot of soul that went into these movies and to make these practical effects. Don't get me wrong, I like some of the practical effects or the effects today with CGI. However, I think sometimes when they use too much of it, it can be kind of fake. I think you really need to have a blend of the old and the new, because I certainly believe practical effects are important and should be part of every movie today, as well as some of the CGIs where you can use it. Let's talk a little bit about my favorite scenes and wrap this up. So here are some of my favorite scenes from Ghostbusters. I'll start with a great character, Louis Tully, played by Rick Moranis. His whole scene with his party, most of that was actually ad-libbed by Rick Moranis. I love how he's introducing all of his clients to each other and talking about how he's able to write off everything at the party. And then there's this really hot chick that he's that's there that's getting bored, and they start to dance, and he hears the noise, and okay, who brought the dog? And the terror dog comes out, and he gets scared out of the apartment. Everybody else is still in his apartment. He gets scared of the apartment, and the dog chases him. And he passes by the doorman. He's like, "Help! There's a bear in my apartment." And the doorman relaxes, "There's a bear in his apartment." And then all of a sudden, that terror dog just whooshes by him. It's really cool. And then the scene where he's up against the restaurant and being possessed by the terror dog is just great. It shows, once again, Rick Moranis' range as an actor and his flair for comedy. He's just wonderful as Louis Tully, and I love that scene. My next favorite scenes, the Ghostbusters reacting to Walter Peck. So Walter Peck comes in and introduces himself to Peter Venkman, and he's basically, "I'm from the EPA. I want to know what you do here." And Peter Venkman's like, "Okay, you got to say the magic word." And he's taken aback. "What is the magic word? Please." And so he goes down there, sees it, and basically says, "Hey, it should be shut down. It's causing environmental problems." And Peter Venkman reacts to him saying, "It's on private property. You go get a court order. I'll sue your ass for wrongful prosecution." So he does get the court order. And when he goes back, he's confronted by Andy Potts' character and Egon. And Egon is basically, "Hey, if you do that, you're gonna release some bad things." And Walter Peck doesn't listen to him, doesn't care, thinks it's all a bunch of hokum and nonsense, and he has him shut it down. And then afterwards, he gets the cops to arrest him, and Egon just reacts very emotionally to it. It's kind of unique for Egon because Egon doesn't really react emotionally to anything in the movie except this one scene, and it's really cool how he goes after him. And then finally, Ray is the one that starts making fun of him in the mayor's office, and he calls him male organness. I don't really want to. I try not to cuss or say anything bad on these shows, but he calls him, Liz, and then Peter Venkman confirms it, and that's another funny scene where Venkman and Stan's almost get in a fight with Walter Peck. So just a really, really fun playoff of this guy who's very straight and narrow and really hates the Ghostbusters. The other scene that I really love is the library scene where we're introduced to the Ghostbusters, and they're going into the library. Ray has just gotten Peter, and Egon's there, and he's underneath the table trying to take readings, and Peter slams books down, which is really cool. And you get kind of a feel for how these guys react to each other. They go down into the depths of the library and see the ghost, and Peter's like, "Okay, guys, do you have a plan? What's going on?" "Okay, I'll take the lead. I'll try and talk to it." He tries to talk to it. Nothing else. "Oh, Ray, what is your plan?" And Ray's like, "I got an idea." And Ray goes and he's like, "Okay, guys, almost get her." And then it turns into this awful, huge monster, which is kind of scary at first. It surprised me in the theater when I first saw it. And it's just a lot of fun to see the reaction to it and how that worked. And you never see them go back to the library and bust that ghost. So it might make an appearance in another movie. You'll have to see it to find out. My next favorite is the scene with Slimer. It is so cool, that whole scene. He's the first ghost that they really bust. And they go into this hotel wearing illegal nuclear accelerators on their backs. They've never tested them, and they finally do with the maid. Fortunately, she didn't get killed. They see the Slimer. Ray shoots it, and then Venkman sees it, and it goes right for Venkman. And you've got one of the most famous lines in cinema history now, where Slimer slimes Peter Venkman, and of course Peter responds with, "He slimed me," which is just great. It's just fantastic. And then they get him into this banquet hall and finally catch the ghost and do various things. You learn a lot about the plot points of the movie in catching that one ghost and what they can and can't do with their streams. It's really cool. And there are a lot of other funny lines in that scene. It's just fantastic. And then finally, my favorite of all the scenes, which I just loved as a kid and just was my favorite just growing up, this Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I mean, when Gozer says, choose your exterminator, and Venkman's like, okay, we got to clear our minds. If we say J. Edgar Hoover, if we're thinking about him, J. Edgar Hoover will appear and try and kill us. And they all, try and clear their minds. And they said, Gozer goes, it's been chosen. And they're sitting there going, I didn't think of anything to you. No, I cleared my mind. And then they look at Ray, and Ray's, I couldn't help it. I thought of the only thing that couldn't hurt us, Mr. Stay Puft. And so you look over, and all of a sudden you see this giant marshmallow man coming down the streets of New York, terrorizing the city. And it's just so funny, the expression on his face, because it's kind of a smiley face, kind of like the Michelin Man in a sailor's outfit. There are a couple of interesting jokes. He steps on some cars and a church and some other things, and they start to destroy him. And you see an angry face, a smiley face, all kinds of things. And you kind of see that in the picture up top, but it's really cool. And when they do destroy him, marshmallow just goes everywhere. And the funny thing is that all the Ghostbusters are covered head to toe in marshmallow, except for Peter Venkman, which he somehow ducks down underneath and doesn't get all the marshmallow, which there's some funny looks on that. So very hilarious. Overall, this movie is classic 80s comedy. It's one of the best movies ever made, and I think you should definitely see it. Go support the new Ghostbusters movie, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. It has the same great spirit of this movie and is a lot of fun as well. Tell me what you love about Ghostbusters in the comments below. Share your experience with the film growing up, and we'll see you on the next one.